everybody. It is 6:30, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. And for the record, we do have a quorum. Mr. Ishmael Flores is absent this evening. So I'd like to announce that this meeting of the Seguin Independent School District has been duly called and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.043 of the Texas Government Code. Ms. Elena Reel is going to lead us in the pledges this evening.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
All right, we'll take a bit of time for a moment of silence. Glad to see everybody here for this board workshop. We've got 4 things on the agenda and hopefully a lot of discussion. We are recording this evening, so that's good news for the folks who can't make it, and hopefully we'll be joined by some additional community people by the time we get around to discussing the facilities. But we're going to start off with a review of the 2017-18 STAR Accountability Standards and Data. So Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Cantu, y'all are on deck.
Good evening, members of the board, President Jimenez, Superintendent Gutierrez. We have a presentation for you today to really do 2 things. Well, 3 things. One is, before we get into the actual data, we want to share with you a presentation that's going to help understand the accountability system. So leading that this evening is our Director of Accountability. And so Cindy Borden will step us through that first for the first few minutes. After that, we'll then look at the actual data. So we'll look at some historical data, and then we'll look at this year's data and talk about that. And then finally, Mr. Schmidt's going to help us then make sense of it. So what does it mean as far as instructional implications? Thank you, Cindy.
Good evening. I'm going to grab this real quick because we've got a lot of slides to go through. I hope this works right. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to try to run you through Accountability 2018 in a nutshell. There's a lot to know, but we're kind of just keeping it to the high points for y'all. Just as a reminder, the 85th Texas Legislature put the new accountability system into place. And what they wanted to do was make it simple for the public to understand and put everything on an A to F system, because people understand A to F. What they don't understand is what's behind the A to F, and that is not at all simple. They wanted to put labels that we are familiar with to each of the grade levels. So an A is exemplary, B is recognized, acceptable, needs of improvement, and unacceptable. So those are terms that people are familiar with. So this year, the rating labels are going to be as follows. You probably already know this, that the districts are receiving a letter grade for each domain that they've been evaluated in and an overall. And so they'll get an A through D for anything that they met the standard, and they will get an F in any domain or overall if they did not meet the standard. And then there are lots of districts out there that are not rated, especially after Hurricane Harvey. Campuses, however, for this year only, will not get the letter grade. They are still going to get the met standard or improvement required labels that we are familiar with from the past several years. We do have an alternative ed campus, MBLC, and so MBLC they receive the met alternative standard label. So these are the 3 domains. They're new, they're completely different than the index system that we've been accustomed to over the last several years, although they sound the same. But there's student achievement, that's the first domain. There's school progress, and then there's closing the gaps. And what TEA has done is they have combined, to get an overall grade, they're taking the first two, student achievement or school progress, and whichever one you score better on, that's going to be 70% of your overall grade, and closing the gap will be 30% of the overall grade. So we're going to take a few minutes and talk about student achievement. It's a little different depending on what type of campus you are. For elementary, it's very simple. The student achievement component is 100% off of the STAR scores. But for that's elementary and middle. For your high schools and your districts, it's a combination of your STAR data along with what they call CCMR, which is your college, career, and military readiness, and your graduation rate. So they take those three components and they've weighted them. The STAR is 40% for the districts and for our high schools. And then the college and career military readiness is also 40%, and graduation rate is 20%. One thing to keep in mind, it's really interesting, is that these come off of the class of 2017 data, not 2018. So 60% of the districts and 60% of the high schools domain 1 grade is a year removed. Only 40% comes from this year. And that's just for the student achievement. So I'm going to kind of walk y'all through how we get each of those components, starting with the student achievement. You might have heard a lot about the 60, 30, 90. What they are trying to do is to get an A. There's kind of a formula to get an A. What they want to do is take the combination of each of the performance levels. You've got your approaches grade level, your meets grade level, and your master's grade level. So the percentage of students that hit each of those grade levels, they combine the three of them and they take the average, and that is going to be the score for your student achievement. And as an example here, this particular example here, they had 93% of their students reach the approaches or better grade level. And then 61% reached the meets or better, and 27 reached the masters or better. So you take the average of those three and you get a 60. And in the, I'm going to talk about scaling later, but a 60 actually scales to an A in this particular system. So that's how you get your student achievement. You take your average of the approaches, meets, and masters, divide that by 3, and you get your student achievement score. So again, for your elementary and your middle schools, that's 100% of the student achievement domain. But for the high school and the district, that's only 40%. The next 40% comes from the CCMR, and here's a whole list of indicators under CCMR. I'm not going to read every single one of them to you, but the one that's kind of most important, not most important, but most interesting, is this one right here under Career Ready, the CTE coherent sequence. If we had any students in the class of 2017 that just took a class in the CTE coherent sequence and received credit, we only get a half point for those students. Any other student that's anywhere that meets any of these indicators, we get a full point for them. I know you're looking puzzled. What TEA wanted to get rid of that completely because they want people to go for the industry-based certification. But right now, most of the schools in the state of Texas, they're not there yet. We've got kids in the sequence, so they're kind of phasing this particular indicator in. So we only get a half credit for those kids. We get a full credit for every other student that meets any of the other indicators. All they have to do is hit one indicator and we get a point for them. If they hit multiple indicators, that's great, but we still only get 1 point. So basically, we're just looking at, it's multiple opportunities for the students to meet this indicator. There is a transition plan for that CTE coherent sequence. So that half point that we get for those kiddos, that's if they are taking a course in the sequence. And we get that half point for them for this year and next year. But starting in 2020, those students will have to have had completed the pathway of courses. So we'll get a half credit for them for the next 2 years. And then after that, these two go away, and the students must earn an industry-based certification for us to get the full point. So TEA is kind of phasing that out. They're giving districts the opportunity to grow the program, get the kids in there, and get them all the way through. The last component for the student achievement is the graduation rate. And again, this comes off of the class of 2017, and this was 20%. And they take the best of our state graduation rate, either the 4-year rate, the 5-year rate, or the 6-year rate. So we can go all the way back to the class of 2015, whichever is better, the 2015, 2016, or 2017. And so that's 20%. So that, in a nutshell, in a very quick nutshell, is the student achievement domain. Now we're going to talk about school progress. School progress has 2 components to it. The first one is academic growth, and that's where we look at the individual students. And the second one is relative performance. So we're going to talk about academic growth first. And it's kind of interesting to describe. First of all, the academic growth includes all assessments with a growth measure. And what that includes is your grades 3 through 8, math and reading, because they take math and reading every single year. And it also includes Algebra 1 and English 2. So students have a growth measure for each one of those assessments. It doesn't include your science or your writing or your social studies, because students don't take that test every year. So what we do is we want to look and see, did they maintain their performance level, or did they maintain their growth measure every year? And so what we have here in this schematic here, we've got a student going from 3rd grade to 4th grade. So last year, when he was in 3rd grade, he scored right in the approaches. We want him to grow, right? We certainly don't want him to go backwards. We do not want him to hit the do not meet category in 4th grade. If he does, he's gone backwards and we don't get any points for him. That's worth a 0. But if this student if he moves over and maintains his performance level, then we get a half point for that student. If he stays within the approaches but goes up, we get a full point. And of course, if they go from one performance level to another, we get a full point for that. So there's this whole host of combination of how students can give us points in the academic growth. So we get either 0, 0.5, or 1 point for every student who meets the terms of the academic growth. So the second part for academic growth is called relative performance. And if you think about it, it doesn't really show growth, but the way the law was written was that it had to be in this domain. So we have a graph here. Along the bottom we have the percent eco-dis students. And along this axis here, you have your star results. And so typically research shows that the higher the eco-dis, the lower a campus performs. And what TEA did last year was they took every single campus and district in the state of Texas, and they actually plotted that out. And they took a line of best fit, and it matches this curve right here. So the higher eco-dis, the lower the scores were. And what they want to do here is they want to see, how does your campus or district do relative to where you would expect them to be? Okay, so that this gray line here that has a C in it, this is where you would expect to be. If your campus does better than where you're expected to be, then you're going to get a B or an A. But if your campus performs below where you would expect to be, you're going to get a D or an F. So it's all about how well you did on the STAR test versus the ECO-DIS. And so those are the two parts, relative performance and student growth. Those are the two parts of the second domain. What TEA did was they said, whatever you do better on, that will be your score. So they score us on both of those components, but our overall score for that domain is the better of the two. Okay, the third one is closing the gaps. And this one, it took me a while to understand this one. This one was written to satisfy the federal government. So the whole, last year TEA spent months and months writing their ESSA plan. Their ESSA plan included all of the components of closing the gaps. And there was a lot of negotiating back and forth. They submitted the plan in December, and the U.S. Department of Ed sent it back, and they said you need to make all these changes. So there was a lot of back and forth in order for us to meet the needs of the federal government plan. So it's kind of, it reminds me of the old system safeguards, where you look at all the different student subpops, right? And so we have all of our race ethnic groups that we've had in the past. We're still looking at special ed. They have added in continuously enrolled and mobile students. So how are the students doing, those that have been with us for 3 or 4 years and those that jump in and out of our district for 3 or 4 years? We still look at our English learners and our ECO-DIS. So these are all the student populations that are being measured in the closing the gaps. And there's a list of them over there. And then here are all of the components. So how do all of those student groups do in academic achievement? And here's the interesting thing, the federal government said we have to look at the meets grade level or above. They don't care about all the students that hit approaches. They want to know who hits the meets or above. And we're looking at all those student groups. They also want to know how are we doing in our growth? How is our 4-year federal graduation rate, which is different from the state graduation rate, because the federal graduation does not have any of those exclusions. So this number is typically lower than the state graduation rate. College, career, and military readiness. We saw that as one whole number in the first domain. Now we're looking at it disaggregated among all the subpops. And then our student achievement domain score, again, in the first domain, it was a whole number. Now it's disaggregated. And finally, this is where TELPUS comes in, our English language proficiency status. So what's the percentage of students that advanced one proficiency level or more on the TELPUS exam? So the way they calculate that rating, there's a lot of math involved in it, but they have a different target for every single subpop for each of those different components. And so if you meet that component, then you get credit for it, and they take a percentage of all the student groups that met the target. And if you're high enough, then you get credit for that domain. So it's also different depending on what kind of campus you are. If you are at an elementary or middle school campus, these are the 4 different indicators, and they're not weighted equally. So your academic achievement for your elementary and middle schools is 30%. Your STAR growth status is 50%. The ELPS, the English language proficiency, is 10%, and the student achievement domain score is 10%. But at the district and the high school, it's a little bit different. The academic achievement is now 50%. Federal graduation and status is 10%. Your English language proficiency is still 10%. And your CCMR is 30%. So they take a formula for each one of these, and then they weight each one, and they get a full score. So, to get your overall rating, as I mentioned before, TEA decided that they would take the better score of your student achievement or your school progress, and that would be 70%, and your closing the gaps would be 30%. But here's the thing, is that you can get a score for each one of those domains, but they're not equal to each other. So what might be a really good score in one domain, say a 60, might be a very poor score in another domain. So what TEA had to do was scale every single domain to make sure that when you make them an A, B, C, or D, that people understand what that means. So, so scale scores were created to align those letter grades and the scores using the A through F system. And scaled scores were established by campus type. So here's how they did the scale scores. They used 2017 data for each domain. And so let's talk about domain 1, the student achievement data, the approaches, meets, and masters. They calculated that for every campus in every district, and they rank ordered all the scores from bottom to top. And what they did was they said that the top 10% of those scores would be an A. Then the next 20% of those scores would be a B. The 40% in the middle would scale to a C, and then the next 20 would scale to a D, and finally the bottom 10% will be an F. So they did this kind of scaling for every campus type and each domain. So you could really have, like I mentioned earlier, a 60, but a 60 turns into an A for your student achievement. So to calculate your overall rating after you scale it, well, first of all, you determine the better outcome of your student achievement and your student progress. Then you weight that better outcome by 70%. Then you weight your closing the gaps by 30%, and then you total those two numbers to get your overall score. Now here's what the numbers look like. To me, it makes more sense when you look at numbers and when you actually dig into the data. So this particular sample, you can see that this campus, the student achievement, they scored an 89. And the school progress part A, they scored an 84. School progress part B, they scored a 72. So the better of those two numbers of your school progress, the better one was part A. So we're looking at this 84 here. But now TEA says, well, you can take the better of domain A and domain B. So now we're looking at which one's better, 89 or 84? It's the 89. So we're going to carry that 89 over, multiply it by 70%, and there you get 62.3 points there. You're closing the gaps. There's no choice. That's your score right there. That's the scaled score. You apply the weight to it, 30%, and that's 24.3 points. So when you add those together, you get an overall score of an 87, which we are very familiar with, and an 87 is a B. So that's the accountability in a nutshell. A very, very, very small nutshell. There's a lot of details that go underneath it, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I know that Mr. Cantu is going to talk about our data and our what's next.
So there's been a lot of just controversy and talk about, is it safe or is it okay to use a letter grade to rate a campus or a district? And so the idea again was to simplify it, right? But it's not that easy, as you can tell, and we didn't go into the weeds of this. So what we wanted to do was show you, give you a really broad picture, yet specific enough for you to understand now what the data really means for Seguin ISD. So you have this chart in front of you. You have it not only the PowerPoint, but then you have it in a single sheet, so it's a lot easier to read. So you can pull that one up. And this is what we shared publicly yesterday when TEA released the results. And so you'll see that on the left-hand side, we have all our campuses. the overall score, whether they're improvement required or met standard. All our campuses met standard. The district rating was a C for every single one of the components. And then every single campus met standard in every single one of those components that Cindy just explained. So that explains that part here, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail in a bit. And then what you have further down on the right-hand side is what's called distinction designations. So what TEA wants to do is they really want to reward campuses that are doing well with like campuses. So every year they put out a list of 40 what they call comparable campuses. They look at special ed rates, they look at mobility rates, they look at eco-dis, and then they say which are the campuses, the 40 campuses across the state that look like Seguin High School, or as closely as possible, that look like MBLC. Well, MBLC wouldn't count. That look like Barnes or Jefferson or any one of those. And then they compare them, and wherever you see a Y, that means that they got a distinction. That means that they were in the top quartile of those 40 campuses. So compared to campuses that look like this, that look like McQueeney, McQueeney was at the top in 5 of the 6 areas. Right? Vogel, for the first time, was at the top at academic growth. So that's something to celebrate there. Jefferson and McQueeney again, science, and you can see I'm not going to read every single one of them. So ideally, what we would like to see is not just that everyone meets standard, but that everyone is at the top when we compare them to the 40 campuses that look like them across the state. So this gets a little more detailed than the other one. The other one is the overall summary. If you flip the page, you have this document too. Here, what we wanted to show you was the actual raw scores, the way Cindy explained. So again, you have all our campuses listed, the overall Domain 1 score, and now we broke it up, not just that they meet or not, but what was their actual score. So what's highlighted in red is what the state considers improvement required. So that's where we need to grow the most. So you'll notice we have a couple of red cells in academic growth. So what that means is that at, for example, Weinert, only 54% of the students met the growth standard. Okay? Ideally, and I think this is safe, what do we want? Do we want all our kids to grow? So what number would we want to see on there? 100%, right? So when we have scores in the 50s, that's why the state says that's not acceptable. So we need to increase those scores there. Same thing goes to relative performance. So compared to other campuses that have the same eco-dis numbers as ours, how did we fare? So at Breezy Meister, we hit a 59. So that's that D range, or actually that's the F range. So we want to bump that up, right? But you can see we do have some areas of celebration. So in Domain 2 for academic growth, we look at, so who did well? We can look at Vogel. 82% of the students at Vogel met their growth score. That is the closest to 100% that we have, right? So what's happening at Vogel? Why did every single student move up? Right, that's the question that we ask ourselves and that Jason will share with you later. What about in closing the gaps? Who scored the highest there? So when we look at that, the highest is an 87. So what's happening at Kinnicky, right? So we gotta look at that. And then we get, again, the overall score when they do all the math calculation and whether we met standard or not. So overall, the celebration is that every single campus met standard. Every single campus, when you take the best of, met standard, which is this, that's why you see all met. And overall, the district was a C. And then we had the distinctions. But of course, We believe in continuous school improvement, right? So we never arrive, we always want to do better. So then what we thought was something that you all would want to see is the state changes the accountability every so often, and usually there's some sort of yearly update. Well, this year we saw a drastic change. So it's unfair not only to the district and the employees, but really to the students to compare how they did last year or in 2016 compared to how they did this year, 2018. So what we did is we said, well, what if we still used the old index system so that we compare apples to apples, not apples to bananas or whatnot, right, with the new domain. So you can see we used a calculator and we said, just for student achievement, 2016, 17, 18, how did we fare? Are we growing? Are we declining if we were using the old accountability system? So what you want to note there is the green. And really what you want to do is track who grew from 2016 to 2018, right? So Vogel grew from the 69 to 71. Kennedy stayed about the same all 3 years. So they're in the 80s, so they're doing well, but they're kind of flatlining, right? So what do we do to keep pushing it up, right? Who can we look at? Look at Batlan. In 2016, they were at a 54. And every year they grew, they're at a 71 now. So they're not as high as Kennedy, but they grew more than 15 percentage points. So what's happening there, right? And if they're growing that much, can our other campuses do the same? So that's what that's comparing the old way to measure based on the accountability with the index system. We did the same thing with the new one. What if the domain existed back in 2016? And you can see there's some growth at Vogel from 39 to 43 over the 3-year period. So some dips, but then some growth. And again, what we want to highlight are those green boxes. Any questions there? Okay. So now you also have this data. I only put the chart on here because if I put the table, it was going to be way too tiny to see, but you have the raw numbers in front of you. What the table then shows, or really shows, and the reason we put this together is we did it by every single content area. So what do the numbers look like when we look at STAR? For example, ELA and reading for the entire district, not campus by campus. So for the entire district, when you compare 2016, 17, 18, approaches, which is the minimum standard, that's approaching grade level, right? They're not yet at grade level, but they're getting there. Meets, they're at grade level, and masters, they're at the top of their grade level. That's kind of how you can think about it. The trend is pretty flat. So have we really moved the needle is the question. And for ELA, between 2016 and 2018, we really haven't. And we saw a little increase in a little drop, pretty flat, right? So that's ELA. For math, we see a little upward trajectory, but overall, pretty flat as well, between 2016 and 18. And again, this is overall as a district, but you do have the campus numbers one by one. There are some celebrations at each of the campuses. I'm skipping through that, but if we were to look at the campuses individually, you do see some growth. And math is where we saw the most growth as the district. So that's something to celebrate there. We took the science information. Again, pretty flat when you compare 2016 to 2018. A little bit of an increase in approaches, but then a little bit of a decrease. Overall in masters, a little bit slight increase, but fairly stable, right? Which is not necessarily good. We want to be in an upward trend, upward trajectory. Same thing with writing. And overall as a district, here's where we saw a dip. This is also a statewide trend. So if you compare what's happening across the state to what happened in Seguin ISD or across the region, whether it's region 13, the Austin area, or region 20, there's a decline in writing. So what are we doing as a state? But more importantly, what we need to focus on is what are we doing here in Seguin? So writing is something that we need to focus on. And then social studies. So some increases and then kind of leveled off in 2018. But again, pretty flat. So now, we talked about, so what does the accountability system look like, right? What are the rules? Because we have to understand the rules. What does the data say, right? And now Mr. Schmidt is going to talk to us about, so what are the implications? What does it mean for instruction? What do we do differently? What do we learn from other campuses? And what do we have to just abandon and redo, right?
I'm going to actually go back here a couple of slides. So one of the things that I've done for this now what segment of the presentation is I took 3 campuses and we really looked for what Mr. Cantu referred to as that sustained growth. So we looked at Potlan with some big jumps on the new accountability system, 29, 33, up to 40. We also looked over to Jefferson, 31 up to a 37, up to a 40, and really asked a few key questions. Really on the inverse side of that, we looked at a campus that showed the opposite trend, so to speak. And in this case, campus that we looked at was Rodriguez, and kind of talked a little bit, established some questions, and said, now what? What are we going to do? So we're going to really just kind of examine a couple of success stories here in Seguin. Also a school that we're really working on switching, flipping some things. Then we're going to talk about really how that fits in overall with continuous improvement and kind of what we're doing here right now in Seguin. So that being said, fast forward, took a look at 4 questions. Looked at Potlan, as I mentioned, and Jefferson. Wanted to know off the top of the principal's head, after thinking through this, give us 3 to 5 reasons for the systemic success. Also, we looked at what have you done to establish culture. You'll hear Dr. Gutierrez quote Peter Drucker, who talks about structure, or talks about culture eating strategy for breakfast. And if you have that culture in place, good things can happen. But if that positive, healthy culture isn't in place, you can come through with all the strategies you want, and at the end of the day, you're not going to see that needle move. We also talked about what has not worked at the school, but more importantly, what are you doing to change it? And then finally, what else would you like to share? To me, we talk a lot about where we really try to quantify everything, but being able to talk to a principal that has shown some sustained success is that qualitative part is very important as well. So coming out of Jefferson, spoke with Ms. White, really talking about 3 to 5 things. One of the things that and I just highlighted some things, not going to read all this, they talked about expectations. And that is also part of that culture. And you all have heard the importance of establishing high expectations. And we're not going to talk about, well, these are our kids and we're going to lower the bar. That's absolutely not what we're going to do. They talk about training teachers, giving them strategic actions that they can take to help them with literacy, to help them with math. And she really, really, really harped on relationships. Those of you that have taught, the importance really within any organization of having that culture where trust exists. If students know that they're valued, they're going to really work and they're going to believe in what it is that their instructors are telling them. Finally, talked really a bit about just the culture. They talked about the importance of hiring. They talked about letting people know we're going to roll our shirt sleeves up every day. Take a look and see, I mean, there are trends, and we know that when you look at certain aspects of data, you can oftentimes relate overall performance to that. They said our kids deserve our best. Our kids come to us with concerns, as happens at every campus and every district really around the country, but what they really want was back to that relationship piece. So just a little bit right there about Jefferson. When they talk about culture, they talk about looking at each student as an individual. They talk about building teacher skills. They talk more importantly about teaching. Teaching is important, but most importantly is learning. And they say, we're not going to look at what the teacher said they taught, we're going to look at what the student learned. But more importantly, we're going to figure out how we can intervene if the student isn't learning. They've also talked about the relationship piece. She prides herself on the fact that it's going against that whole Machiavelli approach where it's better to be feared than to be loved if you want to get results. She says, my staff knows that I'll bend over backwards, remove obstacles, and they're going to work for me based on that because I remove obstacles for them. Talked about what didn't work. One of the things that they continue to stress about is how can we involve families? What can we do to get on academic nights? What can we do to be able to get the parents, the guardians, the caregivers up to the campus, and they've already started planning on that. And then finally, they really talked about the importance of basically looking at progress. It's all about progress. And then finally, what can we do to sustain the growth? Mary worries about that. Mary knows that someday when she says goodbye and goes elsewhere, what type of hands, or I should say, what's the fate of the students? What's the fate of the faculty going to be then? Have things been put in place where organizational memory exists to sustain that growth that we just looked at? And then she also brought, that building capacity, talked about her assistant principal and the importance that he does in helping other teachers. So a little bit about Jefferson, which you saw the data, some good things happening there. Just to revisit the questions before we look at Pot Lawn, 3 to 5 reasons for systemic success, not a flash in the pan sort of thing we're looking at. The culture piece, taking a look here at changes they had to make, and finally, what else would they like to share? Pot Lawn talked about balanced literacy. Everywhere that we've gone to increase our learning, to be able to share with teachers, to hopefully positively impact students, they talk about the importance of early literacy. It's everybody's responsibility. So they, with fidelity, with faithfulness, they have looked at, we're going to put some of our best teachers in kindergarten, first and second grade. Those aren't grades that are tested. However, kids don't learn to read, if kids don't learn to write, if kids don't learn to reason and think at that age, then that growth won't be there. They won't reach their potential. They also talked about the comprehension toolkit, Stephanie Harvey's toolkit. They used that with fidelity. They had a common language where people could learn, this is what we're going to use for literacy. They talked about giving 15 minutes of modeling, reading, using varieties of text. They also talked about collaboration with PLCs, using data at all the grade levels. They talked about peer observations and actually videoing themselves teaching to see how they really looked. They also talked about the culture. And at Pot Lawn, which you saw the growth, they have a morning assembly every day. It works for them. There's a counselor piece where they talk about the relationships. There's a librarian piece where they talk about, look at these new reads. They also talk about giving shout outs to help with that climate. People like to know they're being appreciated for the work they've done. They actually chant a motto every day with those young learners. And then finally they hold them religiously, RTI meetings where they track progress and be sure to put interventions in place. What didn't work in the past was isolation. I'm a subject matter expert. I don't need to collaborate. This is how I've always done it. Well, They've torn down those walls, they brought people together. They don't have people really planning by themselves. They harness the power of collaboration through PLCs. And then other that they wanted to share was the importance of rebranding. And I think that we've seen that happening. I've seen it in the short time, the 10 months that I've been here. I've seen it just on data. I've seen it on conversation. I've heard it in conversations that people have, and it's pretty exciting. We've looked to Linda quite a few times in our principals collaborative meetings to see what are y'all doing over there. Y'all led the district in writing for 2 years in a row now. What's going on? Is that one person? Is that a system? How do you do that? So exciting, very exciting things. They also have family academic nights where they try to get the families up there, and that they're doing some really neat things over there. As our other campuses, they have a lot of neat things going on. Then we looked at the other side of the coin, so to speak, right now, in full transparency. They have a new principal. So I met with Mr. Ariola. We talked about what's going on at Rodriguez. We changed it, basically, the data trends show a different trajectory. What changes are you gonna make? Also, what have you done for culture? What hasn't worked? What else would you like to share? So one of the things that they talked about was writing. We need to work on and focus on literacy. They've set initiatives this year to write across the content areas. Everybody will be writers, every subject area. They talked about student reading levels in K through 2. We need to monitor them better. We need to have accurate running records. We need to make sure that we have the best teachers that have the ability to teach literacy, working with our younger students. We can't just look at reading levels at the middle of the year and the end of the year, or the beginning of the year, middle and end. We need to look at them at least monthly. So they're working that way. And then finally, how are we monitoring data? They talked about looking at iStation scores, common assessment results. They're going to have admin, instructional coach, interventionists, and teachers all working to be able to give interventions to kids. They're not going to be reactive to the data. They're going to be proactive. The culture they talked about, and this is interesting. So they started talking about, before they were meeting monthly in their grade levels. Now they're meeting weekly. They're going to be having common assessments. They're identifying essential standards. Part of the whole PLC process says that you can't teach everything this much. Everything that we have to teach as teachers, you can't teach it in this much detail. You'll never finish. So they're looking at what are the essential standards as the subject, as the experts in that classroom. What are we going to focus on? They're also going to come up with action plans to figure out what are we going to do for students, not just that didn't meet or didn't approach, but what are we going to do for the kids that didn't master? So they're cranking their expectations up over there. Some pretty exciting things I think are going to be happening. It's just, I guess it's the new principal coming in who had been there, who had been able to assess in the short time that he was there, and coming in, an opportunity arose for him, and he's coming in trying to collaborate and put some of these things to practice. Also, they talked a little bit about what hasn't worked. So on one side of the coin at Palan, they say our morning assemblies are vital to our success. Over here, they identified in his needs assessment that we were losing instruction. They weren't starting instruction until 8:30. So they're going to now do weekly instead of daily morning assemblies. Breakfast will start at 7:45. Instruction will begin a half an hour earlier. That's part of their plan, increased instruction time. Also, how do they use the paras? We're going to be working with them for intervention. And then some other things. This is the 2-year plan, really taking a look at attendance, going from the bottom up, the parent piece, the attendance, our dual language rollout, RTI, and this PLC collaborative process. So these are some things that are happening right now. So the big thing that I really kind of wanted to be able to talk to you is everything that we do in the spirit of continuous improvement. As Mr. Cantu said earlier, you don't ever win at that game. You don't wake up one day and said, we're there, we're the best, can't get any better. No, it's all about continuous improvement. So basically there's 7 different factors just to kind of go to these critical success factors. We look at teacher quality, that happens. So through training, through professional development, through aggressive hiring, through some of the new teacher academy things that we put in place, we look at school climate, that culture piece. What can we do to make this a place where kids want to come to school, where parents are going to be proud to get their hands on that pot lawn t-shirt and walk down the street with it. We look at family and community engagement. You saw that brought up. Increased learning time, which is RTI. What are we doing to intervene for those kids that continue to struggle? We look at leadership effectiveness. We go through professional development, collaboration, restructuring at the district level. We've done some things to work with our leaders. We've actually had a pretty big shakeup in leadership at the campus level this past year, in the 10 months that I've been here. I think there's been 8 to 10 new leaders somewhere, whether it's an assistant principal, academic dean, principal. We look at academic performance and we look at how we're using data. All of those things are where we center our efforts. And then going around the outside with the district commitments, we talk about district-wide ownership and accountability. We're talking about accountability. We're trying to be transparent about what's happening. We talk about operational flexibility. There's been some moves some restructuring that Dr. Gutierrez has put forth in this past 10 months. I feel fortunate that at the central office level, we're now able to provide, from a learning and leadership services, we're able to provide every content area support. We have people in secondary English, we have somebody in elementary English, we have a social studies person now. All people with a proven track record, people that understand instruction. We brought Mr. Cantu in for community engagement and school improvement. So we're able to really work on things that we can leverage and help principals with and help campuses with to help students be successful. So we're really looking at this expectations. There's a sense of urgency. I've said it before, most districts with the new superintendent don't create a strategic plan until 2 to 3 years during the person's tenure. We did it in December. I think you came on in August. So, and in March, y'all accepted it. So that sense of urgency is there. We're not resting on our laurels. We're out there. We've been meeting with campuses that we've identified as need to come in and really increase that sense of urgency. We've had numerous meetings and really kind of looking at the structuring that's taken place and the restructuring. So those are some of the ongoing things that we are doing, really, like I said, in the spirit of basically continuous improvement. And really, and in the middle, which I blew up here, we look at data, we conduct needs assessments, we come up with plans, but most importantly, we monitor, because what isn't monitored doesn't get done. So that's a little bit about what drives the work that we're doing. We're definitely working with principals. We've changed formats. We're bringing assistant principals in to the principal meetings to kind of try to build capacity, build leadership density, increase communication. And the new restructuring, we're having academic deans, which is more of an administrative role, work with department leads at the secondary level to make sure that we are implementing but also monitoring, and really pretty excited about the direction that we're headed this year. So you saw the what, which was the whole piece that Cindy presented on accountability, kind of the theory of how the state came up with it. You saw the what now, how it affects the data here at Seguin ISD, and then you kind of saw the so what, really what are next steps, which is really, let's look at the campuses, let's get the data that we can quantify, that we can talk to principals on, and let's run it through continuous improvement and hope for growth. And that's my piece, guys. Any questions about what we're doing? Yes, sir.
So what is your goal for next year?
Our goal for next year, and really, I want to be able to continue to look at strategic plan. I really want to be able to complete everything on the strategic plan. What I'm telling you is it's hard for people to understand, because everything can be simply looked at and how are your star scores. Star scores look, people can understand that when they see it in the newspaper. But at a high school, there's 5 star tests. There's a small number of tests at an elementary school, at a middle school. What I want is to see rigorous learning taking place, I want to see more kids getting masters. I want to see our advanced academics courses, our dual credit enrollment, our early college, high school enrollment numbers, our AP 3s, 4s, and 5s raise. I want to see kids continue to become involved. I want teachers to understand the importance of relationships, having relevant lessons to engage students, and understanding that if they ratchet up what they're doing in the classroom from above, sit and get, drill and kill, to let's involve kids in problem-based learning, that they're going to get them, they're going to really get those dendrites up their brains firing, and they're going to start learning at high levels.
Well, my concern is that I saw our scores and I kind of breathed a sigh of relief, but then I thought to myself, why am I breathing a sigh of relief? We should be an A. And what are we doing to get there?
Yeah.
So if anything, if there are a lot of excuses out there, and we don't want excuses. We want to get to an A. If other schools can do it, we can too. And we need to strive for that and get there as soon as we can.
I appreciate that, and I think that based on the
I think
system.
you're doing a great job, and we've made strides in that area. We just need to keep moving that way.
And we
as fast
completely
as we
agree.
can.
There are school districts that look like ours, and yes, the majority of those schools that are attaining an A do not serve predominantly students that come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, but we feel very confident that now everything that you just heard, and that's just a fraction of what is of the work that's happening with these systems in place. We believe, not think, we believe that great things can happen. And coming in last year, the wheels were already in motion, and we observed and invested really hard in building the culture. But we've got this continuous improvement cycle in place, and I'm very encouraged with the learning that took place last week with our new teachers. This week with teachers, we had all of our elementary teachers together going through Empowering Writers workshop, where all of the campuses will be doing the same thing. We've got to focus on writing across the board. When I go to Pot Lawn, what I did not see at other elementaries that I saw at Pot Lawn was writing in every classroom, in every subject, whether it was math or reading, writing on bulletin boards, and that's what we need to do in every classroom. But the learning that is happening is very different than last year, and I think I'm going to let Pete speak a little bit to the learning that happened for new teachers. He's been here. He can, me, it's just what I observed last year, but Pete's been here for a while. So Pete, if you'll just share what your experience was last week with new teachers.
It's impromptu, so bear with me. But no, it was powerful. We did day one, a whole half day on relationships. And I've been in education for 20 years. I've never seen that, a whole half day. So that was huge. And then we followed it up with a 0 to 2 year cohort of another day of relationship building. So it was huge. Yeah, there's a momentum. It's coming, and we feel it. So it's really.
And if you notice, what Pete didn't talk about, or Jason, is this focus on scores. The scores are going to come naturally with everything that they've discussed. And I speak from experience, and it's going to happen.
If I can add a little bit to that. So there was that new teacher room was a room of, I think it was 80, 90 people, right? It was significant, 90. So when you think about how many staff people we have in Seguin ISD, that's what a wonderful opportunity we have to change culture right there. So if that 100 people come in and they're going to be the leaders that are driving the change, and we had some real candid and open conversations about that you're coming into a district that is potentially a tough place to work, but it also can be a wonderful place to work. So in addition to when we talked about relationships and kind of modeled building relationships, but then we talked about how that can be challenged with poverty and can be challenged with with adversity that comes with poverty and the trauma that can be associated with that, and how important it is. That heightens our responsibility to build those relationships. It also heightens our responsibility to be sure that we know who we are so that we can identify the immediate challenges that that creates, because our communication strategies have to be different so that we make sure that we're recognizing whether it be our natural biases that we bring into conversation, whether it be that we are perceived to be at a different status simply because we, as teachers, have college degrees. All of those things have to be really intentional and at the front of our mind when we're having conversations as we start to change this culture. So it was a great week. It really was a wonderful week. And what an opportunity we have to make Seguin into something much bigger than this.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, thanks.
All of the stuff that you're telling us you're going to do, try to achieve and whatnot, is there going to be some way for you to monitor to see if we're progressing, achieving, or regressing? So that you can take a quick step
Yes.
to fix it.
That's a great question. So one of the things that we've done, basically, and I think that y'all may have been shared with y'all, we started with a strategic plan, and we started coming up with a way to really track every charge that's listed in that, things that have actually happened, and the implementation that's occurring. One of the things that came out of the TEA visit based on our PBMAS scores across the board was you need to work on monitoring. So the first thing that we've started to do is to identify campuses, really kind of try to, lack of a better word, kind of try to triage it based on the data to come in and hold what we call check-in meetings. We've already, for instance, been to the high school for 6 of these meetings, and you go to a meeting, you talk about this is what we need to work on. One of the things that we identified was, let's just really look at kind of the division of labor within the high school. Who's doing what? Is some person doing too much? If you're doing too much, you're not going to be able to get in classrooms and monitor. So basically, we have a running agenda where we talk about things, talk about what we need to see, have conversations with it the following week, and see how it's being implemented. So we've done that now, like I said, 6 times at the high school. We're starting to do our 4th one at AJB, and then every other campus kind of fits in at a different level based on the data. So we're continually having conversations with the principals and really following up and asking for evidence. And this is really all before the year has even started. So
How many meetings have you had with the high school now?
we've had 6.
So 6 weeks, they've already started those weekly check-ins.
And we'll meet with the principal, we'll meet with the associate principal, we'll meet with the academic dean, meet with, depending if it's secondary or if it's elementary, we'll have Ms. Pape or Dr. Valenta, school improvement, Mr. Cantu, and myself. So we're all on the same page, really with crystal clear expectations.
So what we will know is if there's data that's not accurate data, we're going to know. But what also feels really great this year already is I feel like I have full access to every campus, and I couldn't say that last year. And school hasn't even started. And that's exciting. I feel like the relationship between principal and central is there. The relationship between principal and principal is there. It's highly collaborative, and that alone is going to make a significant impact. And then again, you're going to hear a little bit more about that follow-up as a result of, we already started the work, and TEA just came in. And so it was not a surprise that they came in, and what they gave us was not a surprise either. And that's why things were already put in place. But that system that has been developed primarily at this point to turn into TEA is going to serve as a way to monitor so that we do avoid what occurred last year.
As soon as you find out through your monitoring whether it's working, not working, I would appreciate hearing something so that encourage us to proceed with it or change, do something.
And one of the things I truly believe in is full transparency, and you'll get regular updates on where we are with with TA's on-site visit. In addition to that, the strategic plan, which you'll get an updated version, you'll be getting quarterly updates on that, preferably in a board meeting setting.
I would like to say that I came aboard about 5 or 6 years ago on the school board, and I think if these criteria had been applied to our district at that time, we would have gotten an F. We were declining in our scores, and it was really bad. So I'm glad to see the C, and it will take time, and I'll be glad if next time we can make a B, but if it's still a C, it's still a C. It does take time to make changes, and you have to have that transition on every campus, and we have a lot of teachers that are very resistant to change. They don't want to make any changes, and so we have to give them time to come around too, and it's just going to take some time.
Regrettably, our constituents don't really care.
Well, if you saw the meme I put up yesterday, Rome was not built overnight, but they were laying brick every single hour, and that's what's happening.
Yeah.
I think our biggest struggle we've had is continuity and lack of collaboration between campuses. I was happy to hear that you're seeing some positive collaboration between not only the principals and their APs, but the APs principals from this campus to another campus. I mentioned it a few months back about seeing the two middle school principals collaborating. That's huge, because the prior year they were button heads instead of working together. We're all Matadors, we're all Seguin students, we're all Seguin ISD. We all need to be bringing up the same, and it helps if all campuses at the elementary are doing the same thing, so that when they get to the middle schools and then the secondary to the high school, they're being taught the same way. So stay focused on the continuity across the entire district, and then set that expectation for increased collaboration between them. That's and the other thing is, if we're going to set an expectation, we need to stick to it. We don't need to accept below it. There's just that's. Only say, okay, well, she did this, so we're going to allow that. No. Or he did this, he did that. But that's we've got. If we set guidelines, let's stick to the guidelines. Accept the failures. We're not always going to win, but we're at least trying if we fail.
Kind of feeding off of what Mr. Holt said, I'm wondering with the elementary campuses, it seems like some of the campuses, they pull the kids out at very early grade levels where they departmentalize. They have a math teacher and a reading teacher and a science teacher and so on. And other campuses, they are all self-contained. Is there going to be any look at that, or are you going to let the campuses decide? Are we going to try to have some uniformity?
You need to address that. I honestly do not believe in the departmentalizing
Neither do
at
I.
the grades.
Yeah.
And it's obviously not been working for us. And the data shows, and we need to address it in a pretty quick way. And in fact, I was just having that discussion earlier this afternoon, and we need to have a conversation about that.
See, that's the lack of continuity that we've had for the past 7-8 years. I mean, it's the lack of continuity was there, so we didn't have, each campus was being allowed to do different things. So
I think we've all said that it's almost like different little school districts within each campus. I had one other question, and that's about all the content people that you mentioned. Are they going to have a visible presence on the campuses? I hope that they will, because
So
we've got a lot of people working in this building,
Yes.
and we need to get them out there.
Yeah.
And they need to be in the classrooms and observing, and I'm sure as you're going to do a lot of monitoring, they'll be
Right.
involved in that. But
Right, so aside from the times that they'll be working with individual teachers, individual department leads, that sort of thing, there's also already just been basically one day for sure that you're not you're not in Central, you're out at the campuses. We kind of really picked Thursdays as the day that all across the department, it's visiting, it's observing, we're implementing a new principal evaluation system, and we're also really following up on the T-test teacher appraisal system. So there's a lot. You know, last year we came on and trying to get to every campus, trying to learn what the needs were, you know, starting in almost in, you know, late September, October, kind of chasing the tail. So to be able to see this year how things start at summer symposium, even prior to that, and have conversations and have principal meetings, we're able to lay out on the front end, this is what you can expect from us with the calendar. So yeah, yes ma'am, definitely going to have an increased presence. That was something that came back up in some of the feedback that we've gotten. And
The last few months of school, the academic coordinators were on campuses 2 to 3 days a week. They were here rarely, especially as we identified based on benchmark data where there was support needed. We did have a schedule for the coordinators to go work with teams of teachers 2 to 3 days a week, and they were going to those campuses that we identified having the biggest need. And we'll continue to do that as they meet with these campuses regularly, determining where they need the support and sending our troops here to the campuses.
Your question, well, that sort of answers my question. What I was gonna ask is, when you go over each campus's data, you know, you identifying areas where they need extra support and going in and providing, so they have that extra support to help them out.
definitely, we're still actually trying to come up, we don't want it to be one cell of data, or we don't want it to be one indicator, so we're trying to get a rich sampling of data so we can figure out, is this going to be weekly support, is this going to be bi-weekly support, or is this going to be something that we try to hit 3 or 4 times, you know, a month, just in passing based on your data, the fact that you're doing it well. So we are going through, and I don't like saying, I don't want to say tiering, it's not necessarily tiering, but it's really chunking our levels of support based on data. Yes, ma'am.
In the special ed department, is it included in that?
Special ed is, our special populations are woven in through everything, woven in through all. It's a huge area of focus. There's been a lot of increased attention to it already prior to the school year starting, and we learned some things last year about special programs that we're definitely focusing on.
And another thing that we did during the week, we had administrators back. We had Cindy facilitated with principals and their leadership team, which included teacher leaders. They went through the data and were able to look at where their campuses were. And I'm not sure we've done that before with our principals.
It had been several years since
So it had been some time. And this is a very complex accountability system. So that's, and to not have provided that opportunity to our leadership is really a disservice that we were doing. Because as you heard, very complex. So thank you, Cindy, for doing that this year and spending the day. And what I saw this year was like I said, very different and encouraging, but what I saw with new teachers and what I saw with the teachers coming back this week was what I've seen in Plano and in Round Rock, and very high quality teacher learning happening. So thank you all for supporting me and bringing on someone to really drive the professional learning initiatives through the appointment of a professional learning person.
I have one more question. I'm kind of afraid to ask it, but maybe you can put my mind at ease.
Hopefully I'm not afraid to answer it. Yes, ma'am.
I hear you're going to do a lot more monitoring. And I hope that doesn't mean we're going to test, because I remember years ago, there was such there was an outcry, not just here, but all across the state, about why are we testing these kids? Seems like every time we turn around, we're giving them a test. So are there other ways we're going to be able to monitor besides testing?
No child left untested. No. So we are going to, one of the things that really kind of helps us is that we're transitioning into a process called SLOs this year, which y'all will learn more about at a future board meeting. Part of the new T-test or the T-test observation is where teachers are groups of teachers, or in some cases even campuses, will come up with a student performance goal. They're going to look at their data. They're going to come up with skills that their students aren't getting. They're going to revisit these skills, and what we talk about is it's not always something that you quantify with a multiple question test, that sort of thing. It can be using informal assessment. It can be having the student write. It can be observational, some of those things. So a lot of it, we're part of having all the systems in place. There does need to be that data that we can quantify, but we're going to do it systemically through things that are already happening, like common formative assessments. So we don't want to put kids through the battery of taking more tests. I think we definitely agree with that. So yeah, there's definitely going to be structures in place at the campus, and the good thing is that we have really the experts, the teachers within their PLCs answering that question number 2, which is how are we going to know if they get it. So assessment drives instruction, and they're going to use those questions to really focus what they're doing on the kids that don't get it and the kids that are getting it. Hopefully I
Yeah, I can sleep tonight, thanks.
all right.
Any other questions, anybody? I want to thank all 3 of you. Very great description, and thank you for getting this headed in the right direction. I think there's a lot of great things to come. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item B. The on-site performance-based monitoring analysis system. And I'm sure there's a way to say that acronym out loud, but I'm not even trying.
CDNS.
Okay.
I'll call it simple. So you're not going to hear a lot about the actual plan. What I'm going to share with you is what's happened since the visit and since the last time I reported to you all what that looked like. What I'm passing out is the corrective action plan that we submitted to DEA. And really what I will share with you is the work, right? Because I think that's more important than the actual plan that TA receives. So I just want to give you all an update. We were identified for those 9 areas of non-compliance. That's what I shared with you all each last time in a lot greater detail. What you have in front of you is the plan for every area of non-compliance. So TEA gives us up to 1 calendar year to correct this. So what you're going to see on the plan is, so for example, in CTE, in the first box in this template is difficult to use. TA realizes it, but they don't change it. They just say, fill it out, turn it into us, and tell us what you're going to do differently. And so the first one that you see, I think, is bilingual, and I should have flipped it on here so it makes sense. And really, the only area of non-compliance in our bilingual program was that we didn't evaluate the program on a yearly basis and then share that with the board. And so that is something that should happen yearly. Okay, so we understand that, we know that, and we're going to fix that. And what we told TEA is, thank you for identifying this. We understand the law, we're going to do it yearly. So what we will do is create a calendar of here's when it needs to happen. There will be a program evaluation. We have reached out to other school districts and asked them, what do you use as a monitoring tool? What do you use to evaluate your program? Can we see a copy, because we're going to create one. And so we shared that with TEA. TEA said this is good, you can use that, and now just make sure you present to the board. So the exact same non-compliance area was identified for CTE. We're supposed to have the same yearly update and program review. It didn't happen. Towards the end of I think maybe in May, our director, CTE, Steven Gonzalez, shared some touch points with you all. Of course, this site visit happened in February, so they weren't here for that. So it came out that it didn't happen. We're going to improve on that process. We're going to calendar so everybody knows when it happens. And then in SPED, or in special education, we did have 7 areas of non-compliance. So the rest of those boxes or cells that you see on there, each row is an area of non-compliance. We worked with our special ed director, Ms. Dean, and of course there's the team to create the action steps. So that is what you see in the rest of the plan. So it is a little difficult to read, but if you just read from left to right through each column or through each row, you'll see what the area of non-compliance was, and then every single step that we're taking. What I want to focus more on is what's happened since I last shared this with you all. So we've met as a team, I think 3 times now. We drafted this corrective action plan. We submitted it to TEA for feedback before it was due to TEA because we have a great relationship with them. We said, give us your feedback because we don't want to just present something for compliance. We want to make sure that whatever we're presenting to you is quality work. They gave us some feedback. We updated and we resubmitted on 8/13, which was this week, Monday? I can't even, the days are, I think it was Monday. And then the following day, so on Tuesday, just a couple days ago, TEA approved it. And since this presentation that I prepared earlier this morning, we had another follow-up conversation with TEA just to make sure that everything is okay, and whatever they didn't share in an email saying this is fine, that we had a conversation with them. What needs to happen now, so this takes care of the 9 areas of non-compliance. We are going to meet the law, that is without a doubt. What TEA then also gave us was 26 other recommendations that they believe are required action steps in order to move the district forward. So what I asked them was give us a little bit more time for that one, because that's not something that we can put together in 2 or 3 weeks. That's something that we really have to think through. And so the times that we've met, we have identified, I'm a big believer of accountability. And for me, accountability means 2 things. One, there's some positive pressure, right? If we're having a conversation, if I put your name to something, if I put an action to it, I expect you to do it, right? And it's not just an expectation that then we back off and say, well, it'll get done. It's how do we support, right? So positive pressure and support is what I tell people all the time. So part of what you're gonna see in this targeted improvement plan when it's developed, it's due to TEA on September the 5th. So we have a couple of weeks to put our thoughts together. We already have a draft of it. And so as soon as it's submitted to TEA, we will also get feedback before it's officially due and then after. And then we will update you all. You all decide the frequency. I think quarterly update is fine, but you all tell us. So regardless, we're gonna monitor the plan on a monthly basis. That is how we're gonna collect data. We come together as Learning and Leadership School Improvement. Of course, that includes our multilingual department and our special education department, CTE department. Come to the table and say, here are the action steps that we said we were gonna take. Not just the corrective action steps, but everything else that's on this targeted improvement plan. What happened, right? Did we do what we say we were gonna do? And then I think here is the most important, that 3rd bullet. We're gonna adjust, right? So I think somebody said, or somebody asked, Mr. Umbello, I think you asked, so what do you do if it's not working? We adjust the plan. We don't shift the goal ever. The goal stays the same. Our strategy shifts, right? And so that is what we will do for this. So we will definitely be compliant, and then we will have a very strong action plan to monitor not just our special programs, but really our Tier 1 instructions, which impacts every single student. So in case you all have more questions about the plan, I'm available. You know, we will check in with Dr. Gutierrez. Let us know how we can help clarify any other questions, because some of this language sometimes does get a little dense and stuff. But what does this mean? Questions about either the corrective action plan, which you have before you, or the targeted improvement plan, which we're drafting.
Any questions?
Not yet. Fair.
We're ready. All right. Yes, I think we should take a quick break. It is 7:54. If we come back about 5 minutes after 8. One last piece. All right, it's not quite 8:05, but we're all at the table, so let's reconvene, okay? It's 8:04 for the records, okay? All right, moving on, and Mr. Lewis is ready for our facilities update.
All right. I was asked to put a topic of discussion about the stadium on the agenda for tonight by board member, but I kind of put it in there as a facilities update to just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of background to know where the Facilities Committee's meeting, and talk about a little bit about what we're doing, and then we'll kind of transition into that as we go. So our Facilities Committee has been meeting. We met 6 times. One of those was touring some facilities. But we've kind of looked at some of the things that y'all have seen already. The demographic study, we've had very deep talks about the demographic study and what that means to the district and moving forward and what that looks like, and a lot of the positive elements and hopeful elements that are in that demographic study moving forward. It's pretty exciting because it's there's a lot more there than in past studies that we've had that are really just a lot of positive growth, and you're seeing a lot of that come into reality. Before, in some of those other demographic studies, it was like, well, it could come and it could happen, but now you drive by Vogel and you got the trees down, and you drive out 46 and you got a street almost coming up to 46, and so you go out to the out I-10 and you can see them. So you see these things happening, and so that's really exciting. And so I think that's an exciting thing for the committee. We did our TASB study where they came and did a overview of the buildings and outlined a lot of things that needed to be done to the buildings, and a lot of things that we kind of know. When you hit buildings that hit 20, 25, 30, 35 years old, things you just start to have to happen. So they kind of grouped those for us, and we've gone over those in the committee. We have hired Pfluger Architects, went through a process, hired Pfluger Architects to help us with some long-range planning and helping us look at all those things that have to happen on those campuses, and then put that into a plan moving forward. What can we address first? Second, try to put some numbers to those things. I think I told the committee I should have brought Pfluger in couple of months earlier. We should have started that process earlier, because it just really has helped accelerate the conversation. Last night, on Tuesday night, we had a great conversation just about facilities and the impact that facilities that are not being used have on neighborhoods, and the looks, and why there's. We had some great conversations, and I'll jump on back to that in just a minute. Some of the discussion points we've had in the committee, really look at attendance zones, just as in regards to how do we use our buildings most effectively, and what that's going to look like, as far as that R word, rezoning, and when that's going to happen here. It's been since 2010 since we've done that, and we're due for that again. And so looking at that and how that'll fit into the overall process, looking at our future growth, those attendance zones and the future growth, looking at campus repairs. There's a lot of the committee's very focused on making sure we get a lot of these campus upgrades or campus fixes done very early in that plan, moving forward, that year 1 to 3, and getting a lot of these things back up to speed. There's been a lot of just kind of passiveness maybe on some of that building upkeep, as far as just when you hit that 20, 30 years old, things need to get done. Roofs, floors, a lot of stuff has to happen. Again, we talked about our facilities use, and really our inventory of what are our buildings that are sitting there that are not getting used, what should we do? And it kind of went from, well, everybody's going to think, well, we need to do this or this, but it really didn't come down to real quick discussions. We came into a meeting and we talked about Juan Seguin for an hour and a half. Do you think you could talk about Juan Seguin campus for an hour and a half? But there was a lot of good conversations, and moving forward in our September meeting, the committee's going to be ready to come give you some recommendations on some things that they believe needs to happen. And we came to a recommendation Tuesday night. And so we feel real good that we really made a good decision, and it was well thought out and had a lot of good input about that. So we're excited to be able to start bringing some things to you guys to start considering, and some tasks that you can take and start moving forward on, and some projects that you can start moving forward on. And we also look at all of our other facilities, things that might not necessarily be a building, could be, of course, the stadium, it could be, looking at the baseball issue, looking at softball, looking at the other things that maybe aren't sitting in transportation, Nelson's, maintenance, looking at all those other pieces that have to do and have to run the district. We talk about what do we use for storage. Well, we kind of use one Seguin for storage. And so, well, if one Seguin's not there, what do we do for storage? Do we need more storage? Maybe we don't need as much stuff. There's that whole, so we have some good conversations about that moving forward. So I'll talk about the stadium. The stadium from and Pete, you can tell me if I say this right, the committee agreed to the statement that doing something about the stadium is up on the top of the list with other priorities. They have other priorities, but we need to do something about the stadium moving forward and start that process to get that taken care of. All right. So just kind of a review. There was a kind of an engineering study done back in May of 2016, and there was a board report back in May of 2016 about that RABA study, looking at the, I think you can watch it online from Mr. Alexander did it, talking about the things that the study pointed out. Of course, not at ADA compliant. We know it's not ADA compliant as far as the new rules. It may have been ADA compliant at one point. It's not now. There was talk about some rusting, some aging structure, concrete pedestal deterioration, rails, fencing, some of the welding, the catwalk. There was things that were brought up. They selected a company through the bid process to do some of that work, and they addressed a few things on the stadium. They addressed some of the railings, the fencing, some of the braces and support welding, fixed some concrete pedestals, mainly on the visitor side, that had been deteriorating, got those back up and looking good, fixed catwalk repairs. They fixed the gaps that were under the visitors' seats. There was kind of a wide gap under seats, and filled those in. They did some electrical upgrades to the press box, added some floor coverings in the press box, some AC units. There was actually two contractors. Another contractor did the concrete work, etc. And I believe the total cost changed about $487,000 was the cost of all of that work done at that time. All the work that was done for structure was inspected by an independent engineer that looked at the work that was done. The thing that didn't happen is E3, usually there is a plan filed with TDLR if there's some sort of construction work. E3 claims that it was all maintenance work, and if you're doing maintenance work, TDLR doesn't come look at your stuff if you're painting, welding, stuff like that. But they didn't do that, and we have a great track record in this district of turning.
Mr. Lewis, can you tell us?
I will tell you what TDLR is. I knew that was a common thing. TDLR is the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Licensing regulations. All right. So they do all sorts of stuff. They license professionals. They do the accessibility to buildings, those kind of things. So somebody called them and said, hey, this didn't happen. So TDLR called us and said, hey, this didn't get filed. Contractor didn't file this. Usually contractor files it. Said, okay, tell us what we need to do. So we filed a TDLR report. So it's on file. You can go to their site and see it. He said, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So basically we just filed late, and then we started the process that we would have done originally. And so he says, okay, this is the companies you can call. So we called a company, the same company that did the high school, and they came out and did an inspection of the work. And so basically, because we added floor coverings in the press box over the concrete, that's basically the check box that's set off. All right, now TDLR is we come into play. So they look at the accessibility to the press box, and then from the press box to the parking lot, and the press box to the restroom. And so he came out and did his report, and there were some things, said, okay, this isn't, y'all need to fix this, this, and this. We need to add some rails in the bathrooms. We had to fix the doorway going into the bathroom. There's a little gap there. We need to change a couple of door handles. So door handles in the press box. And so those are all very fixable items. But there's one item we cannot address immediately, and that is access to the press box. We don't have access to the press box that meets that. And it's not you just can't add an elevator, because that elevator would be the elevator to nowhere, because you would never leave the elevator because you can't go anywhere once you get off of it. So what we'll do is they have a form, and you do this with every project. We'll file the form back. I think we have until October 13th to file that form. I'll have it in before then. But what we'll do is say we've completed these items. we cannot complete this item at this time, and then we send them our timeline or plan saying we can fix this by, we believe we can have this done by this date. TDLR is very understanding. They know we're a public entity. They know those are high dollar items. He told me they know that requires time, requires things. So we will put a date on there, and I'll send it in, and they can approve it, or they can send it back and say, no, that doesn't work. So that'll be our next step, is to file that report with TDLR, and they'll respond back, okay, you have until whatever date you decide, or not. So, yes, sir.
I thought we already had a letter from TDLR stating what we needed to be done. Was this complaint filed by, you say it's in progress, when did that come about?
So
Who filed it?
I was notified of the complaint in April 10th.
This year?
This year. April 10th this year, that we didn't have a plan on file. And so the guy said, the inspector said, okay, you need to file. So we filed, paid there's a filing fee, I can't remember the dollar amount, a few $100, which would have happened the first time anyway. So we did that. Then you contact one of their private inspection company. We used Accessibility Unlimited, I believe, because they had done the high school. So we were familiar with them, and that was one of the ones he recommended. So that gentleman came out, did his inspection, gave us a report, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z on this. And then, so we're doing that. And then most of it's done. I think we just need to do the door handles. I think it's the only thing that's left.
Yeah, that's one thing.
So once we get the door handles replaced, I'll take that sheet that he gives us. It's pretty standard. I did it. I didn't do this because, and I will have it done by then, or I'm filing a variance. And so variance really ain't an option. First one's not an option because we can't make accessible to the press box. And so we'll check the other one and say, here's our plan. And what we hoped, this is what we hope to happen. That's the best we can do at this point. So, and so you have so many days. You have so many days to make corrections, and then you have so many days to file your paperwork back with them. So that's kind of where we are on that piece. I've been asked about the complaint, so that's where that is. It's just we're just delayed. I mean, if we'd have done this 2 years ago, if it had happened 2 years ago, we'd be in the same boat. So as far as, well, we'd be 2 years ago this boat. So all right. So what we're
What was the complaint?
that we did not file with TDLR.
That was the complaint.
The complaint was we didn't have the project filed with TDLR.
And I think it's good for you to share that it was because the cost was over $50,000.
Yeah, there's a cost. I've learned this. There's a dollar amount. If you spend over a certain amount, you're supposed to file you're supposed to file a project with TDLR. Now, you go back and look. The district has tons of, over the last 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, you can look back there and see the audit, the cafeteria addition built, and all these stuff at the high school. So we're on there for all these things. And so this one, talking with the company, they felt like when they were doing it, they didn't meet that. And at this time, and James and I, this was kind of after the fact, so we kind of going back because we weren't really involved in this process at that time. So, all right, trying to learn why it didn't get done and those kind of things. So, and there's a few things that set off that accessibility piece, and the flooring covering was one of them. So our next steps, what are our next steps here? So, but I kind of go back and forth. Our facilities committee is working on like a 1, 3, 5, 10-year long-range facility plan. Something hasn't happened since maybe like back in the 90s. I think we had a long-range plan, but haven't had one put together since like around 97 or so. In September, our board, the committee's going to start coming to the board and make some recommendations to y'all, some things that we think the district can start addressing right now. Really, most of it's going to be in regards to properties that we have, and some ideas they have to move on that. And I think I think it's going to be a good presentation, have some good things moving forward. And they also said we need to start moving forward with some other things. And one of those they said we need to start planning for doing something to the stadium. And one of those things is if you project out when you might be able to, well, first of all, look at the stadium. The stadium is going to be a high dollar because you're going to deal with restrooms. You have to deal with the stands. You don't have to deal with the field immediately. The field's there, but it's a multi-million-dollar project to have that stadium redone for the most part. So one of the things, and they said, is to communicate that they believe that something needs to be done to the stadium. So putting a plan in place to start addressing those things, that's going to require design build services moving forward. If you wait until the day you...
A design
process. Well, if you do design build, if you wait until you pass a bond for that point, you pass the bond, you get the funds, you hire your architect, you start the design build process, you got 6 to 8 months probably before you're even ready to start touching that. And then working with something like a stadium, you have a lot of phasing you're going to have to deal with. You try to keep it functional and moving, so you can phase that. So one thing we can do moving forward, and just kind of get y'all's input tonight, is we could go out and seek an architect to do a design only part of the process and have that piece done and completed, in which we would own the design piece ahead of time. And so if and when we get to that point where we make a decision about going forward with funding in some way, that we would already have that piece done. So once that funding piece is decided and in place, we could immediately start on that process. Now that process, that design phase, is a very expensive process. It's usually about 6% of the cost of the project, overall cost of the project. I do not have a cost estimate for what a stadium might be. I can say that a neighboring district, Comal, is building a new high school right now, and their budgeted amount for stadium is about $18 million for mainly your normal looking high school stadium. Now what we could come up with could be more, it could be less, but that's the best immediate close by number that I could let you guys know about tonight. All right, so but I'm not writing you a quote on that one. So you take 6% of that, you're looking at about an $800,000 investment into.
5%.
Yeah, so you take that amount, and about 25% of that 6% is 75% of that 6% is the cost to design, and the other 25% of that 6% would be once you go into the build phase to pay for that extra part. So the whole design build phase costs about 6%, but about 75% of that is what it would cost to design a facility if it was in that price range. So things that you have some options on that is it would have to be, we would have to dedicate those funds for that piece immediately, but if we end up going to a bond election at some point, you can reimburse yourself for those costs, because if you waited, you would put those costs in the bond anyway. Did I say that right, Tony? So, but it would be meaning putting some, it's not a decision, we're not making a decision tonight, but if we want to move forward, we would want to post and start that process now. We would still have to come to the board for you to approve the selection of an architect, and then of course moving forward you have to approve the expenditure and those kind of things moving forward. So just kind of throwing all that, that's a little mouthful, and I know it's a lot throwing out tonight, but I think one of the discussions we had last night, our Tuesday night, was some people were worried that we'd still be talking about facilities and things a year from now, and because they felt like we've just kind of been frozen in those discussions, and they really want to see us move forward on items and not be talking about the same thing a year from now. So I said it, and I'm on film, and it's live, so we're not live, but it's there. So James and I'll entertain questions, conversation, whatever you'd like to hear. Yes, sir.
Okay, now back when this all came down from DLR, when this all happened, this modification, maintenance items that we were doing, it was due to the Robert Kisman report going back exact same. We had like, the primary was the 15 to 18 footings that were underneath the band's cheerleader drill team section of the visitor side that were failing, pretty much. They were redlined by Robert Kingsbury. They've been that way for several years. It had been ignored over and over, and we hadn't done anything with it. Now, we've gone in and repaired that, but that didn't fix the whole problem, because we had other ones that are going to deteriorate, because there were some that were already yellow. The cost, if we keep putting money into this, I mean, ultimately that is money we could be putting to doing it the right way instead of Band-Aiding. I know that over the years we've Band-Aided a lot of stuff, and we've neglected this district. And I don't know, I'm sure the facilities committee members on the board here have seen those Band-Aids, and I'm sure they've been pointed out. I know I've seen a lot of them over the 4 years I've been here. But I mean, we've got to move forward here. Stadium is a key point, because we house so many people in that stadium at certain times. I mean, graduation, how many people we have at graduation? I mean, the stadium is full. I mean, there's so many accidents, and it only takes one accident to cost us a ton of money as a district. And we got to be proactive about that, preventing those accidents. And I don't think that it's never been mentioned that we needed to shut it down. We just needed to take action on it. So I guess we'll hear more about what needs to be done there in the next week or so, or next board meeting, hopefully.
Yeah, the Pfluger's gonna look at it. They're not doing a full structural analysis. I mean, they take the expensive for a facility that we know pretty much needs to. We know the stands are not. They don't have much. They got 50, 60 years of cheering and jumping and fun in them already. So they're not.
Well, we've had a report done for the past 10 years by Robert Kingsbury.
Right.
I mean, we don't need another report. We don't need to spend the money on that.
Right.
We need to be spending money on repairing or replacing the unit.
Right.
I mean, we've been looking at the same report. It's only gotten more and more red on it. I mean, I don't know if the other board members had a chance to look at that report from 2 years ago, but I mean, it's ugly. I mean, I'm not. There's a lot of events that take place in that state.
And that's kind of the gist. We trying to take some action to move forward and get the ball rolling. So when we get to that point where we can put boots on the ground and make things happen, we're ready for that to happen. But it's a big upfront, upfront cost right now that we would pay if we move forward anyway, but we would be doing a little bit early. So we're not waiting until a year from now before we can start doing anything.
Over the years, I had noticed several buildings, campuses that needed repair, and nothing was done for years. So I'm glad to see some work being done, but I would hope that we would have some sort of a timeline, a budget, schedule to repair campuses as needed.
We are the committees. Just want to make sure we're not saying this is the priority over everything, because there's other things that need to get done up front as well. And so, but those pieces are more project-based pieces. They're not design pieces. So if we need to replace roofs, we need to replace floors, we need to do parking lots, we need to do some other things at the campuses to beef them up. Those aren't necessarily big design projects. Those are more.
And this is what you're going to present to us in September?
I'm going to present some of the suggestions from the committee in September. Like, we had a big conversation about Juan Seguin, and they're going to be ready to tell you what they like to suggest to do with Juan Seguin. Is the first one, and we may have another facility to talk about it at that time as well. So,
to answer your question, Mr. Amador, Pfluger Architects, they're assessing each and every campus building, and they also have engineers, and they're working with M&S. And what they're going to do is they're going to get all this information back to us, and it's also going to have a cost, and what that cost is associated with per campus, per facility, or whether it's HVAC to flooring, for civil, like anything away from the building, like parking lots, grading, things of that nature. So you'll have a cost dollar.
yes, sir.
How long is an architectural thing good
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question, so that's a good question. I'll make sure Sean, like in the meetings, is going to take that note for me, so we don't forget that question. It's a good question. So, yes.
So, on the engineering, there was the one engineering, on the stadium. So there was the one engineering study, and is that the only one?
There was the
Or
one done
TASB?
There was the one done 2 years. TASB didn't do an engineering study. There was the one from 2 years ago. There was some things addressed, and then the work itself was inspected by an engineer, and then that's the last study that was.
So as far as somebody coming in and looking at the stadium?
We have not had it we have not done another engineering study because we know what it was, and we know what we fixed, and so we know what's not addressed, and so it's going to be, we know it's still there.
So after they did that, do we have something saying that the stadium is safe, or do we, because we're putting a lot of people in these stands, and I worry a lot about the safety of that stadium.
I don't have, I think in order for somebody to come in and give you a guarantee, they're going to come in and it'll take months for somebody to come in and do a joint by joint study of of the condition of every pillar, its weight, its weight capacity, it'll take a long time to do that. So I do know 2 years ago when this was reported, the comment was made at that point that for the age of the stadium, it's not too bad, but it's got issues, and some of those issues are still there. We know it's not ADA compliant. The ramp isn't. We know that. It's been that way. We've known that for the entire life of the stadium. So
I get that. It's just, so after they had the study, and then they fixed those things, and then did somebody come back in and say, okay, these things were repaired, so you're good and safe to put people back in these stands?
Well, so like on the supports, they checked the supports?
Yes.
Concrete supports, the things that got supported, yeah, those, okay. You fixed the pedestals, those were fixed well. And then they, say, for instance, looked at the
Catwalk.
Catwalk had additional stuff. The engineer came back in and said, yes, it was fixed. They fixed it correctly, and the work is good. And
So it was the engineering company that came back in?
It was an independent engineer. Inspector came out to do, I'm sorry, that got pushed over there.
Right.
But an independent engineer came out and looked at the work that was performed by the other company.
Very, very, very really good engineer. His name is Steve Persine, and he's very well known in the San Antonio area. And he came out and he addressed the pedestals as well as the catwalk, because those were the two items that really stood out in the Robert Kishner's report. And Mr. Hope remembers that report, and that's what really stood out. So what we did is we went ahead and took care of those items because they're very important to take care of. And that was taken care of. So Mr. Persine came back out and took a look at it again, and then he gave us stamped approval saying, everything was done properly there. But we still have issues with the actual structure, with the rusting, because a lot of that stuff wasn't scraped and sandblasted and repainted. But as like Mr. Lewis brought up, the facility is 60 years old or above 60 years old. So there's a lot of wear and tear, and you can feel it when you're walking on the aluminum. It kind of bounces a little bit.
That's why I worry.
Yes.
I've been in that stadium, and that's why I like to keep this topic in the forefront of our conversations, because...
And then when I looked at that particular stadium there, when I went in, I started looking at all the structure and all of the things that needed to be done as far as the structure. And I met with Mr. Lewis, and we talked about it, and the cross beams and all that, and the columns, the concrete pedestals. If things are happening above ground, they most likely they're happening below ground as well. So we got to keep that in mind. I said, hey, we got to keep that in mind. And so then I started took another step backwards and started looking at it a little deeper. And I said, okay, now we put a an elevator here, then the press box got to go because the press box is not big enough. Because anything over 300 square feet, you got to have an elevator. Because the press box is not wide enough. Because it's about, I think, like 1,000 or 1,200 square feet. And then you have to have restrooms to make it ADA accessible. So it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I took another step back, started looking at the ramps. So then for every inch, yeah, basically it's 12 to 1. 12 to 1, okay? So those ramps, and you see how those ramps are, and I want to say they're at least 7 foot high, maybe a little higher. You know, if you were just to put a ramp straight across, you know, at that number, you're probably in the middle of the parking lot in the high school. So that's why when you go to some other facilities, you see ramps that make curbs, and you know, because it's a high step up. So in order to change that, then the structure would have to change. So I said, well, that's not going to work, because if you start changing the structure, you might as well just knock this down, because you got a lot of rusting, because it's over 60 years old. So I took another step back, and I see ponding. So where you have ponding, you know, it's ponding right underneath the stadium. I'm sure everybody's seen it before. And that also helps as far as with the corrosion. So in order to take care of that, you have to, we're going back to the civil side again, you gotta provide grading, but then you got these huge columns in the way, so you can't properly do that. So I take another step back and I start walking the stadium, you know, the track field. So I start seeing these lines on the running track. So I said, okay, so I know I have ponding here and I have ponding underneath the running track. Not on the actual surface of the field, because that's a crown, okay? So if you walk and you look from a distance, you see the lines and it looks like they're this number. And what that shows that there is something going on below ground. So the track will actually have to be redone too as well. It had to be completely tore out, rebased, and it's layers and layers and layers and layers until you get to the finished product, which is that rubber running surface. Went further back, and I started looking at the parking area. And I said, okay, well, we really don't have a really good ADA accessibility into the stadium. And then you go further back, and then you have restrooms that it's like the ones to the north. That's not ADA because the slope is way too high. It's too steep, excuse me. So now that's probably going to have to go. So after walking it over and over and over and really assessing it, basically it's time to start all over. And I believe I walked that stadium with each and every board member. I shared some of those things with with you folks, but there was a process that I spent many hours there just looking at it and saying, now how can we do this to make it safer and for not only our students but for the public as well that goes in there. So and that's we're at this point now.
Well, you don't have to tell me that we need a new stadium. I'm right there. I know we need a new stadium. My concern is it responsible of us to continue to use it in its condition that it's in?
Well, I'm not an expert on that right there, but they've been using it for 60 years. But I can't tell you if something's going to happen. I don't have that. I'm not an engineer.
But we know it has issues.
Yes.
It does.
It does.
So the work that was done was in 2016?
The study that was done was in 2016. There wasn't any comments at that point about it's not
right
safe for use at that point. And we have done a little bit of safety, but 2 years have passed, and and not everything was done. But
Is Fluger looking at the stadium at all, or are they just looking at the other?
they're not doing a full engineering study. Like I said, we've got the engineering study.
Right.
So anything that they would do would just kind of be repeat or checking off. Yep. It's continues. So.
Would they be able to look at it and say whether it's safe for us to continue to use?
I don't think a company's going to do that unless we allow them access to go they're not gonna put their stamp and say this place is safe unless they get to go check every bolt, every joint, and that's a very,
At that point, you have to.
it's a very expensive and
Say,
time-consuming
2 months.
process. I mean, if we were to do that, we would probably be almost ready to move on to fixing it by the time they can get finished with it. I mean, we've been told it will take months
Yeah.
to do something like that, so.
But it sounds like fixing it would be more expensive than building a new one.
It's possible.
Oh, yes, sir.
I mean, because you would have to replace so many things already. And then I don't know if it's worth putting stands on structures that are 60 years old.
Especially, excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, would the design phase that you're talking about, would that take a look at taking the old one and renovating it and at the same time look at building a brand new one? Or would it only?
No, it would just be moving forward with
The existing?
one to, and it would be an overall plan as it fits into the whole space there. And then, but it would be designed with the intent that hopefully we can move forward, some point next year and take care of it. And if we don't get to that point, then we'll have to come back to the drawing board and figure something else out. So this is the most, I think, prudent way to start this conversation. And it's a long way to go. I mean, there's 18 million, whatever, X number, $18 million that'll have to be worked out. So.
And to give you a time frame, just for the design phase, you're talking 4 to 6 months. And then to actually build it, now you're talking 11 to 13 months. But if it's planned properly, you can still continue to have the sports there because it's seasonal. And that's how they basically build these stadiums without having all away games or anything like that. So I just want to bring that up too. So what you're looking at is a little over a year and a half to actually complete the project from design to completion.
And what's the time frame from when you say, okay, we're gonna build a new stadium?
So if we take it, say the first, I'll use the B word, the bond word, if you pass a bond in May, which would be our first opportunity to do that. And then if the plan is already in place, that would be a project we could start fairly quickly. By June, I would think. And then I don't know how much can get done in a time frame. That would be something our architect would have to tell us. We could do this much before the season starts, and then we can do this while the season's going, or then when it's over, we can do this. It may entail we're going to work on stands on this side for this point, and then we're going to go do the stands on this side at this point, and they'll have to tell us how they can phase it. So if you weren't going to use it for time, I'm sure they could finish it a lot quicker, but there's really not a time frame except for the summer, and they can't do it over the summer, the whole thing. In stadiums you've seen rebuilt, they usually phase it over time. They can get a substantial part done over the summer, but then another part might have to be done starting in December, and you're just using one side, and the other side's off limits. They're going to have to help us walk us through phasing, so whatever that might look like. And it all probably depends, because there's plumbing work and electrical work, and all that stuff has to be phased, and they're the experts on that. So, and that's kind of why we want to move forward, so we can. I mean, all we're committing to now is just putting out an RFQ. There's no. Still got to come to the board. You have to approve that person, and then you got to approve the expenditure for that at that point. Because once we pick an architect, then we have to negotiate, and then we got to have funding secured, if not before, at that point. And then we go through a design phase that would include whatever process with board members and facilities committee or another committee that kind of puts that piece together. So.
And that RFQ has been put out, right? Because I saw it on the paper.
We put it on the paper, but we haven't posted it yet. We wanted to make sure we talked to y'all tonight before we did that. We didn't want to just show up and y'all not have heard that yet. So he just kind of had to make a paper deadline. And so worst case scenarios, if y'all were like no, you just say we posted it too early in the paper. But we'll post it probably tomorrow if just to let y'all know, we're gonna post it tomorrow. And then, you know, at that point, you don't have to finish the process if we have any other direction from y'all. We can stop. But at this point, it doesn't hurt just to go get qualifications and get people to start making their bids, so. Or making their proposals, for qualifications is all it is. Proposal, it's qualifications. We just finding a qualified architect at this point. We're not looking at stadiums, we're not looking at drawings. For us, we're just looking at their qualifications, kind of like we did with vestibules and what we did with Pfluger for the long-range plan.
Yeah, it's basically, exactly the same process. It's just for services, proposals, for qualifications, and then we actually interview the firms, and then we will decide who we decide to go with. But of course, you folks will have that ultimate decision. So we're talking about a month.
Yeah, I worry about the stadium. My thought is I just want us all, I feel like we're responsible for the people that we put in that stadium. Do we feel like it's safe enough to put all those people in that stadium, or do we need to put them in a different stadium while we play somewhere else? Or
None of us are structural engineers, so I don't think we can make that call either, but I think, they did the work back a couple of years ago, and it's all been inspected and approved, so. I don't know what more we can do other than moving forward with trying to decide what, if anything, we're gonna do with the old one, or if we're gonna try to pass it on to get a new one. So we do need to move forward with some type of decision-making process.
I feel like this may get the ball rolling and we're not just waiting anymore. We're trying to get something started.
So RFQs will take a month, what you're saying?
Take about a month. Post it for two weeks. Just post for 2 weeks. We receive the qualifications, we review them, we interview, and then we bring them.
September 11th is when it'll close.
So the earliest we could actually make a decision on moving forward with just the design phase would be a September 14th.
Yes, sir.
You can't make one time.
Correct. And yeah.
Any other questions?
It's one sort of, well, I guess it's part of this. As I go by, once again, I see a lot of playground equipment. Couldn't another school use that equipment?
I could go by there and look at it.
Yeah, I don't know the quality of the equipment.
You
so.
know,
I think
pretty much.
it all depends on if we can remove it and structurally keep it intact, and then put it back in place and make sure fall surfaces can be met. But that's our goal. We're going to try to round up everything that's usable there, and the same at mini mats as well.
And so in September, you're going to come to us with suggestions or recommendations from the facilities outside of the stadium. And is there any way we can get that a little bit in advance? I know we don't get our board packets till Friday, and board meetings on Tuesday, and if it's a lot of information that you're going to give us,
All right.
if we could get some of
Yeah, I can
that
probably
would be
start
great.
give you some insight or
But
forward, little foreshadowing in the.
maybe in the.
We kind of want it to be a big surprise.
Yeah.
No, we don't. We were kind of excited. We were really excited to get to a really agreed upon, solution last night on it, because it was fun. It was like we did it. Look at this. We got to this point. So it was an exciting it's kind of exciting. So you don't want to spoil the surprise.
I'm looking at August meeting. I'm excited about it.
We did talk about it. We just didn't know we could. But I'll put some in an update. It's not a big. So we just felt like we want to make sure we tell you the reasoning behind it. As part of the recommendation. So you hear that as part of it, so you'll understand how we got to that point. I think that's important for y'all to understand how we got to that point. Because it was really good. It was a good conversation. So.
That was really good.
All right.
We can't wait to hear about it.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no further discussion on facilities, we'll move on to the plaque. Mr. Hoffman?
Good evening, trustees. Great to see you all this evening. I believe in your, as a handout today, in addition to the update that went out last week, the monthly update, we provided kind of a mock-up of a proposed or suggested or ideas for a plaque for Seguin High School. We would like to move on that. The school's been open for a year, and we would like to get the bronze, or I don't know if it's actually bronze or if it's brass, to look like bronze, plaque up on the exterior of Seguin High School. With the handout, the material you have before you, you'll see that it does have our current school board, along with Dr. Gutierrez and cheers, Mr. Esquivel and Mr. Pizzagna, along with the contractors and the architects. Below that, you'll notice that we do have the sitting board from the fall of 2013. We actually had almost, not really two incarnations of that board, but when the bond was approved by the board in August of 2013, we had the 7 board members that you see on that list. As you know, in September, Ms. Irma Lewis passed away, and the bond was approved in November of 2013. So while putting this together, trying to be all-inclusive, we definitely felt it would be important to include Ms. Lewis's name for your consideration and review. We also have the superintendent, Dr. Garza, who was the sitting super back in 2013. And in order to recognize those officials, we had 2 board members and a superintendent who served in between the fall of 2013 and August of 2017 when the high school opened. We've included those 2 individuals as past officials as well. And we've got Mr. Esquivel's favorite slogan, "It's great to be a Matador," at the bottom. So we wanted to share this with you and get your thoughts or get any ideas on this that you may have. And we'd like to proceed and get this ordered. And I know Mr. Amador had asked what the cost is, or approximate cost. Naturally, that's going to, a lot of that's going to depend on the size and how much text we have on the plaque. But Mr. Pizzagna was able to research it. Ballpark is probably $800 to $1,000. If we get real fancy, it can get anywhere up to about around $1,500. But
Let's try 300.
300, okay.
We'll find a plastic one.
Yeah, we'll get the one that's this size. Yeah.
Where will this plaque go? Where will it be?
We'll determine that. I think the architects probably have a place outside the high school doors for it. You know, we kind of thought, well, do we really want it outside? Well, do we really want it inside either? Outside's more appropriate. That's traditionally where you're going to find a plaque of this nature, so people see it as they come in and outside the building. And it'll, of course, be an all-weather plaque. It may outlast the high school.
I saw the plaque at Breezemeister, and it was the current board, superintendent. I think that's all, right?
It could be.
It was, that's
Right.
it.
But this was a
About
big,
that
long
big.
process to
It could be, and I think Mr. Lewis has a photo to show us.
Give me a second.
Okay, that's what some districts do. You kind of look in district to district, it all depends. Some of them just have the sitting board when the school opens, like you said, Mr. Amador. But it was a feeling putting this together. We wanted to get all the information out there for you to look at and to consider. You know, we don't build high schools very often, about once every 50 years here in Seguin. So we wanted to make sure that we were fair and inclusive in putting this document together.
And that 2013 board, they put out 2 bonds. You know, they did a lot of work and put a lot of thought and process into this. So I do think that they need to be recognized, as well as superintendent.
Well, we can shout it out.
I say we put it on plaque.
A wooden one.
Ben doesn't like plaques.
Well, and there's,
I think it's a lot of money.
we had looked, and I mean, this is Burnett High School. We're probably looking at doing ours horizontal as opposed to vertical in order to get the names, but you'll see it, this one had past members listed, of course, contractors, architects. and so forth. And of course, that's the current Board of Trustees. But it would be, that's kind of the look that we're contemplating.
And the printed piece that we have at the table gives you a better idea of what Nancy was trying to put this together based on this plaque. So the number 2017 would be much larger than what you see on the typed page. It would look similar to what we see on this actual photograph. And of course, the name would be bigger and spaced out across the top as well.
Exactly.
Is there a reason why we chose Board of Education instead of Board of Trustees? I know on prior plaques, we've had Board of Trustees.
We could do Board of Trustees. We just,
I mean, I'm just asking.
Sure.
On our other plaques within our districts, on the other schools, the most recent one I guess would be Rodriguez and Barnes.
Right.
Correlating those plaques to this one, you know, how do they correlate to what you're proposing here?
This again is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be more inclusive for those.
And you know, typically looking and researching it, you know, people who broke ground definitely need to be on it. So, and that's, you know, and there's a couple people here that lost, that since passed, that I think need to be attributed for their time served as well. So,
But we can go with Board of Trustees and the Board of Education.
Board of Education is usually used in the Northeast more than here in the state of Texas. So we're more commonly known as Board of Trustees. So
I just have a problem with the name.
I'm sorry.
I just have a problem with the name.
History's history.
Past history, yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you all very much.
Well, if there's no further discussion, and I don't hear any complaints, I'd like to call this meeting to an end. Any complaints? Everybody with me? Okay, it's 8:56, and thanks everybody for your good dialogue tonight, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Some of you will see earlier.